She was sitting alone at a table set for two. The candle was still lit. The second glass of wine still full. The wrapped gift beside an empty chair that had been empty for 40 minutes. She wasn't crying. That was the part that got him. She was just sitting there with her back straight and her eyes fixed on the middle distance, like a woman who had learned a long time ago that falling apart in public was a luxury she couldn't afford. Weston Avery stood in the doorway of that restaurant and recognized her immediately. His ex-girlfriend's older sister, one of the wealthiest women in the country, and she had been abandoned. He should have walked away. Every reasonable part of his brain told him to walk away. He walked in instead. If this story already has you curious, you're exactly where you need to be. Subscribe to this channel and follow along until the very last word, because the people who leave early always miss the part that matters most. Hit like if you're already feeling something and drop a comment with your city and country. I want to see just how far this story has traveled. Now let's begin. The reservation was for 7 o'clock, and Weston was already 15 minutes early, which meant he was standing on the sidewalk outside Meridian, one of Ashbourne's few restaurants that still believed in cloth napkins and candles that weren't fake, with his hands in his coat pockets and nothing useful to do with himself. He'd been early his whole life. His mother called it a virtue. Cameron had called it annoying. He didn't think much about Cameron these days. That was something he'd gotten reasonably good at over the past 4 months, not thinking about her. The relationship had ended quietly. The way things end when two people finally admit that being compatible on paper doesn't mean much if you're not actually compatible. There had been no dramatic scene, no screaming, no dishes thrown. Just a long conversation on a Tuesday evening that started with, "I think we need to talk," and ended with, "I hope you find what you're looking for." And then he'd driven home, relieved and guilty about feeling relieved. He had Maisie to focus on. He had a project deadline breathing down his neck. He had enough. That's what he'd been telling himself for 4 months, and mostly he believed it. Tonight was a business dinner his client, Dennis Farrow, a commercial developer, who wanted to turn a gutted textile warehouse into something with character and investment appeal, which usually meant Weston had to figure out how to give a building a soul without making it too expensive to sell. Dennis had picked Meridian because Dennis liked places that made him feel important, and Weston had agreed because the food was actually good, and because he figured he could sit at the bar and review the project notes until Dennis arrived. That was the plan. The plan lasted until he looked through the restaurant's front window. He almost didn't recognize her at first. That sounds strange, considering how many times he'd been in the same room as Helena Bell over the past 2 years' family dinners, Cameron's birthday, a chaotic Thanksgiving where the oven broke, and Helena had quietly ordered enough catered food to feed everyone without making it feel like charity. She wasn't a stranger to him, but she'd always existed in his peripheral vision, the way significant things sometimes do when you're focused on something else entirely. Now she was centered in the frame of that window, and he couldn't look away. She was wearing a deep emerald dress that looked like it had been made specifically for her, the kind of garment that costs more than most people's monthly rent, and somehow manages to look effortless anyway. Her dark hair was pulled up not perfectly. A few pieces had come loose around her face, which for some reason made it worse to look at. There was a small wrapped gift on the table beside a place setting that hadn't been touched. A second wine glass still full, a candle burning between them like it was waiting too. Helena was checking her phone. She set it face down on the table, picked it up again, set it down again. Weston checked the time. 7:14. The second setting had been there for a while. He knew he should go inside through the main entrance, find the bar, sit down, and leave Helena Bell to whatever private humiliation she was navigating on her own. She was 30 years old. She ran a company that operated in 11 countries. She did not need Weston Avery's awkward intervention. She probably had 4 people she could call right now who would be here in under 20 minutes, people with more money, more polish, more of everything. He pulled out his phone and looked at it without seeing it, put it away, looked through the window again. Helena had stopped checking her phone. She'd picked up the menu instead and was reading it with the focused concentration of someone who was not reading it at all, just holding something to look at, something to do with her hands, some prop between herself and the empty chair across from her. He'd seen Maisie do the same thing with picture books when she was upset about something, but didn't want to talk about it yet. Hold the book, turn the pages, pretend. Something in his chest shifted in a way that was inconvenient and impossible to ignore. He went inside. Meridian was warm after the October chill outside, low lighting, the smell of something with garlic and wine, soft jazz doing its best not to be noticed. The host's stand was right inside the door, and a young man in a dark vest looked up at him with the expectant half-smile of someone whose job was to be relentlessly pleasant. "Good evening. Do you have a reservation?" "Faro party," Weston said. "I'm early. I'm going to..." He glanced toward Helena's table. "Actually, I'm going to say hello to someone first." He didn't wait for permission. Helena didn't look up until he was 3 feet away, and when she did, her expression went through several things: quickly surprise, recognition, and then something that looked like the particular pride of a person who had just been caught in a moment they would have preferred to be private. Weston, not a question, not quite a greeting either. "Helena." He stopped at the edge of her table. "You look like you're waiting for someone." She held his gaze for exactly 1 second longer than was comfortable. "I was. Past tense. He's not coming?" "He sent a message 45 minutes ago." She said it evenly. The way you say things when you've had enough time to process the anger, but not quite enough to be fully past it. "Work emergency." Which is probably true. It's also probably convenient. Weston looked at the wrapped gift. He looked at the untouched wine glass. He looked at Helena, who was watching him with an expression that said she was trying to decide whether to be annoyed or grateful that someone she knew had walked in and found her like this. He pulled out the empty chair across from her and stood behind it. "Would you let me be the man who was smart enough to show up?" He heard himself say it and couldn't quite believe he had. It was the kind of line that either landed or made everything worse, and there was a solid 2 or 3 seconds where he genuinely couldn't tell which direction it was going to fall. Helena looked at him. She looked at the chair. She looked at him again. "You have a dinner," she said. "My client's not here yet either. And even if he was, you're sitting alone, Helena, at a table that was set for 2. With a gift you bought for someone who sent you a 45-minute heads-up text and called it an emergency." Something moved across her face. Not softness, exactly. More like recognition. She slid the empty menu across the table toward him. "Sit down, Weston." He texted Dennis to say he'd arrived and would be at the bar, fully planning to excuse himself the moment his actual client walked through the door. He ordered a sparkling water because Helena had wine, and he didn't want to make this feel more like a date than it already accidentally was. And then he sat across from her in the chair that had been empty for 45 minutes and tried to figure out how to act normal, which was difficult, because nothing about this was normal. He'd known Helena Bell for 2 years through the lens of Cameron, her older sister, the one who'd made something of herself in ways that Cameron both admired and quietly resented. Cameron talked about Helena the way people talk about landmarks. Always there, always significant, always slightly out of reach. Weston had formed a composite impression from those conversations. Helena was driven, private, exacting, extremely successful, probably a little difficult. What he had not fully accounted for was the actual Helena, the one sitting across from him now, pressing her thumbnail against the base of her wine glass without realizing she was doing it, the one whose dress had a small crease along one shoulder from where she'd apparently rested her chin in her hand while waiting. The one who, when she finally exhaled and let some of the composure drop, looked like a woman who was genuinely tired of performing. "You don't have to stay," she said after a minute. "I'm not going to collapse. I know you're not, so you're just here to be charitable." "I'm here," he said, "because I walked past that window, and you looked like someone who could use another human being at the table. That's not charity. That's just being a person." She turned the wine glass slowly between her fingers. "Cameron always said you were decent." She said it like it was a limitation. Helena's mouth curved, not a smile, not quite, but something in that direction. "She says a lot of things. You two close? We're sisters." A pause. "It's complicated." He nodded like he understood, because he mostly did. He had a brother in Memphis he talked to 3 times a year and loved completely, and couldn't spend more than 4 days around without wanting to go home. Family was complicated. That was just the baseline. "How's Maisie?" Helena asked. He looked up, surprised she'd asked. "Good. She lost another tooth last week. She's negotiating hard about the tooth fairy rate. Apparently her friend Emma gets $5, and she thinks the system is unfair." Helena laughed. It was a real one, brief and caught off guard, the kind she clearly hadn't been expecting to produce tonight. "Is she wrong? Honestly? No, $5 seems reasonable. I told her inflation is real and I'd look into it." "You told your 6-year-old about inflation." "She's going to have to learn eventually." Helena shook her head, and when she looked at him this time, it was with an expression he didn't entirely know how to categorize, something warm and slightly confused, like she was recalculating something she thought she'd already figured out. She's lucky, Helena said, to have a father who she started differently. My father was mostly absent, not dramatically. Just there was always somewhere else to be. Weston didn't try to fill that with something reassuring. He just let it sit between them, and she seemed to appreciate that. Dennis Farrow arrived at 7:40, scanning the room with the practiced ease of a man who expected to be accommodated, and Weston caught his eye from across the restaurant and held up one finger. Dennis checked his phone, ordered something from the bar, and settled in to wait. He was used to Weston being worth a few minutes' patience, and tonight Weston was grateful for that particular reputation. He turned back to Helena. "I have to go," he said. Not apologetically, just honestly. "I know, but listen." He rested his forearms on the table, leaning forward slightly. "Can I ask you something first?" "That depends." "The person who didn't show up tonight, was it serious? With him?" Helena considered the question in the way she seemed to consider most things, carefully, without performing carefulness. "I thought it might become serious. I wasn't sure yet. A beat. Now I suppose I don't have to be. Is that, are you okay with that?" "I'm more okay with it than I expected." She tilted her head. "Why are you asking?" He thought about it for a second before answering. "Because I want to know whether I made this worse by sitting down. Whether you'd have rather been alone with it tonight." "You didn't make it worse," she said. Then quieter. "You actually made it significantly less terrible, which is unexpected. I'll take that." She looked at him, really looked, the way she hadn't quite allowed herself to before. "You always did do that." "Do what?" "Make things less terrible without making a production out of it." He didn't know what to say to that. So he just stood up, put on his jacket, and said, "I'm glad you let me sit down. I'm glad you walked in." She said it simply, without anything performative in it. He nodded and turned toward Dennis's table. What he didn't notice, walking away what neither of them noticed, was the woman who had pushed through Meridian's front door 2 minutes ago and stopped cold the moment she saw them together. Cameron Bell stood just inside the entrance, still wearing her coat, holding her phone in one hand and staring at her older sister and her former boyfriend as they wrapped up what looked unmistakably, painfully, like an intimate conversation. She watched Weston stand, watched Helena look up at him, watched the warmth between them that neither of them was trying to produce or conceal. And then her face did something complicated. Weston made it through dinner with Dennis Farrow on autopilot, nodding in the right places, making the right notes, saying the right things about load-bearing walls and natural light and the difference between industrial character and industrial cold. He'd done this long enough that his professional self could carry the conversation while his personal self sat in the back of his mind and thought about Helena Bell's laugh, which was not helpful. He'd spent 2 years being careful, being appropriate, keeping whatever it was he'd noticed about Helena in a box labeled "not relevant" and "none of your business," and "you are with her sister, Weston, act accordingly." He'd been good at it. Mostly. The thing about Helena was that she didn't try to be anything. Every other significant person in Weston's life, his mother, his brother, Cameron, especially had a version of themselves they showed in public, and a slightly different version they showed in private, and the effort of maintaining both was something you could detect if you were paying attention. A small tension in the jaw, a certain carefulness around topics, a performance however minor, however well rehearsed. Helena was the same person in every room he'd ever seen her in. That was unusual enough to be notable. More unusual, she asked questions and then listened to the actual answers. She didn't need to fill silence. She was funny in a dry, quiet way that caught you sideways, without ever seeming to be performing funny. And she'd been sitting alone at a table set for 2, holding a menu she wasn't reading, and something in him had simply refused to walk past. He was in trouble. He understood that. He just hadn't figured out yet what he intended to do about it. His phone buzzed on the drive home. He checked it at a red light. A message from an unknown number. "This is Helena. I got your number from Cameron's contacts last year when we were trying to coordinate her birthday and never deleted it. I just wanted to say thank you for tonight. It was a genuinely kind thing to do." He sat at the red light for a second longer than necessary. Typed back, "You'd have been fine without me, but I'm glad I didn't walk past." Her response came 40 seconds later. "So am I." He put the phone in his pocket and drove the rest of the way home, in the particular silence of someone who has just made a decision without quite deciding to make it. The babysitter Renata, a retired teacher from down the street, who'd been covering Friday evenings since Maisie's was 3, had already gotten her to bed. Weston stood in the doorway of his daughter's room for a long moment, watching her sleep in the nightlight glow, one arm thrown over the stuffed rabbit she'd had since she was 2 and refused to acknowledge needing. "You're doing fine," he told himself. "You're doing exactly fine." He almost believed it. He went to bed, lay in the dark for a while, thought about an emerald dress and a second glass of wine nobody had touched, and a woman who laughed like she'd forgotten she was allowed to. Sleep took a long time to come. He didn't call her. That was the decision he made somewhere between waking up Saturday morning and making Maisie's breakfast scrambled eggs that came out slightly rubbery because he'd gotten distracted, toast that was a shade darker than intended, orange juice that was fine because orange juice was hard to ruin. He sat across from his daughter at the small kitchen table, watched her eat with the complete unself-conscious focus of a 6-year-old who had opinions about the egg texture but was willing to overlook it, and told himself that what had happened at Meridian on Friday night was a kind thing done in a moment, nothing more than that, and that extending it into something else would be complicated in ways he wasn't equipped to navigate right now. "Daddy," Maisie said without looking up from her plate. "Yeah, you're doing the thinking face." "I don't have a thinking face." "You have like 4 faces," she said. "There's the normal face, the work phone face, the Maisie what did you do face, and the thinking face. You're doing the thinking face." He looked at her. She looked at him with the patient, slightly pitying expression of someone twice her age. "Eat your eggs," he said. "They're rubbery." "I know." She ate them anyway, because Maisie was, at her core, a pragmatist. He did not call Helena. He went through the weekend doing the things the weekend required: a trip to the hardware store, a load of laundry, a Saturday afternoon at the park, where Maisie ran herself to exhaustion on the climbing structure, while he sat on a bench and reviewed project specs on his laptop and tried to be present in the way he was, always telling himself he needed to be more present. Sunday was groceries and meal prep, and 30 minutes of reading after Maisie fell asleep, and then lying in the dark again, which was becoming a habit he didn't love. He did not call Helena. Monday morning, his phone rang while he was pulling out of the school drop-off line. Unknown number. He answered out of professional reflex. Weston. Her voice was clear and a little careful, like she'd rehearsed the opening and then decided against the rehearsed version at the last second. "It's Helena. I know you didn't reach out," which was probably the correct instinct. "I want to be honest with you about something. Is this a bad time?" He merged into traffic. "I'm driving. Give me 2 minutes." He pulled into the parking lot of a dry cleaner he'd never actually used, put the car in park, and said, "Okay, I've been thinking about Friday," she said. "Not in a way I'm not calling to make it into something it doesn't need to be. But I'd be lying if I said it was nothing. And I don't really do the thing where I pretend something is nothing when it isn't. That's a lot of nothings. I know, I'm saying it badly. A beat. The point is, I haven't stopped thinking about it. And I thought you should know that. Because you're a decent person, and you deserve someone being straight with you instead of playing the game where we both pretend and then one of us gets surprised." He sat in the dry cleaner's parking lot with the engine running and thought about what he was about to say before he said it, which was more self-control than he usually managed in situations like this. "Helena," he said, "what about Cameron?" Silence, not long, 3 or 4 seconds, but heavy. "What about her?" "She's your sister. I was with her for almost 2 years. I know. That's not a small thing. I know that too." Her voice didn't waver, but it slowed down slightly, the way it did when she was being precise about something. "I'm not asking you to ignore that. I'm just telling you that I'm 30 years old, and I have spent the majority of my adult life making decisions based on what is appropriate and expected and strategic, and I am exhausted by it. And when you sat down at that table Friday and said what you said, that was the first time in a very long time that I felt like a person someone actually wanted to be near. Not the company, not the portfolio, just me, sitting at a table alone, and you walked in anyway." He didn't say anything for a moment. "I'm not doing this over the phone," he finally said. "What does that mean?" "It means if we're going to talk about this, really talk about it, it's not a phone conversation." He paused. "Can you do Thursday evening? There's a place on Clement Street, a bistro called Harlow's. It's nothing fancy. Just good food and enough noise that no one pays attention to anyone else." Another silence. "Shorter this time. Thursday works," Helena said. 7 o'clock. "I'll be there." "So will I," he said, and meant it in a way that had nothing to do with punctuality. He told himself it wasn't a date all the way up until he changed his shirt twice and then stood in front of his closet feeling genuinely irritated with himself. He was 32 years old. He had a mortgage, a daughter, a client presentation due in 10 days. He was not the kind of man who changed his shirt twice before dinner. He changed his shirt a third time and went with the first one. Renata arrived at 6:30 and found Maisie in the living room, building an elaborate structure out of blocks that she explained was a business office for dogs, which Renata accepted without question because she had learned early on that Maisie's creative projects ran deeper than they appeared, and it was better to simply be an admiring audience. "You look nice," Renata said to Weston. "It's a work dinner." Renata looked at his shirt, looked at his face, said nothing, which was worse than if she'd said something. He got to Harlow's 8 minutes early. Helena got there 6 minutes early, which meant they arrived within 2 minutes of each other, and then stood on the sidewalk for a moment in the particular awkward grace of two people who are not sure how to greet each other when the context has shifted underneath their feet. "Hi," he said. "Hi," she said. They went inside. Harlow's was exactly what he'd promised, a narrow, warmly lit room with mismatched chairs, and a menu that changed seasonally and enough ambient conversation that you could say something real without worrying about who was listening. They got a corner table. Helena was wearing a dark green blouse, not the emerald dress, something quieter, and she'd left her hair down, which he'd never seen before. It changed her face in a way he hadn't anticipated, made her look less like the version of Helena Bell that appeared in business publications, and more like the version that had laughed sideways at his inflation comment on Friday night. "Thank you for coming," he said, after they'd ordered. "You said it wasn't a phone conversation." She turned her water glass once on the table. "You were right. I almost talked myself out of calling you back," he admitted. "Monday after we hung up, I sat in a parking lot for about 20 minutes. Doing what? Being an idiot about it." He shook his head slightly. "I kept making the list. You know the reasons why this is a terrible idea. The list is long, Helena. I have a version of it too," she said. "Mine starts with the fact that you were with my sister. That's my number one as well, and ends with the fact that I am objectively a complicated person to be in any kind of relationship with. I travel constantly. I have a company that requires enormous amounts of my attention at unpredictable times. I have boundary issues in the sense that I sometimes don't notice other people's until I've already stepped over them. And I am told, by people who know me well enough to say it, that I have a tendency to try to solve things that need to be felt." He considered this. "That's honest. I figured you'd rather have honest than charming." "I already knew you were charming," he said. "Honest is better." She looked at him with an expression he was starting to recognize, that slight recalibration, like she was updating an estimate in real time. "Can I ask you something?" "Go ahead." When you were with Cameron, did you know? About whatever this is. Did you know it was there?" The food arrived before he could answer, which gave him a moment he was honestly grateful for. He waited until the server had gone before he spoke. "I noticed you," he said. "I'm not going to pretend I didn't, because you'd probably see through it anyway, and then we'd both be embarrassed. But I didn't. I didn't do anything with it. I was with your sister, and I wasn't the kind of man who does something with a thing like that when I'm with someone else. So I noticed, and I put it somewhere, and I left it there." Helena was quiet. "But yeah," he said. "I knew something was there." She picked up her fork, set it down. "I used to tell myself it was just that you were easy to talk to. That I liked you because you were good with Cameron. And good people are just pleasant to be around. That it wasn't anything specific. Was that convincing?" "For about a week at a time," she said. "Then I'd see you at something at dinner, or Cameron's thing, or whatever, and I'd have to rebuild the argument from scratch. The argument being that it wasn't anything." "Yes." He ate for a moment. She did too. Outside, Ashbourne's evening traffic moved past the bistro's narrow windows, headlights blurring in the October wet. "I don't want to hurt Cameron," he said quietly. "Neither do I. She's going to be hurt anyway." Helena set down her fork. "I know." Her voice was steady but not easy. "I've thought about that every day since Friday. I've had the version of this conversation with myself probably 30 times. And I keep coming back to the same thing. I love my sister. I love her, even when she's difficult, even when she makes things harder than they need to be. And I've spent a lot of years arranging my life around managing her feelings." She stopped. "But I don't think I can keep doing that. Not when not when I feel like this. I don't know how to justify it to myself. You're going to have to tell her." "I know. Before this goes anywhere," he said. I can't be something you're hiding from your family. I'm too old for that, and Maisie deserves better than that. I wouldn't ask you to be," she said. "I want to be clear about that. I don't do things sideways. If this is going to be something, then it's going to be actual, it's going to be real, with our names on it, And if my sister has a problem with it, then I will deal with that like a grown woman. She paused. I'm just asking for a little time to figure out how to tell her in a way that doesn't feel like an attack. How much time? A week? Maybe 2. He thought about it.
Okay.
She exhaled, not dramatically, just a small release, like something she'd been holding had just been allowed to set down. Okay, she echoed. They finished dinner talking about things that had nothing to do with Cameron or complications or the carefully maintained lists of reasons why this was a bad idea. He told her about the warehouse project, the structural challenges, the client's somewhat contradictory demands for something that was simultaneously rustic and sleek and profitable, the way Weston had started to see the building's original bones as something worth preserving rather than just framing around. She listened with the quality of attention that had first gotten under his skin months ago, the kind that didn't drift, the kind that asked follow-up questions that proved she'd actually heard what he'd said rather than just waited for her turn. She told him about a negotiation she'd spent 3 months on for a manufacturing partnership in a new market, the 22 rounds of revised terms, the night she'd sat in a hotel room in a city she didn't like and thought very seriously about just going home and calling the whole thing off. She told it not as a success story, though it had ended successfully, but as an experience, with the frustration and the self-doubt included, and he appreciated that she didn't clean it up for him. When the check came, he put his card down before she could reach for hers. She started to object. Helena, he said. You know what I'm worth, she said. This is ridiculous. I know what you're worth, he said. You're picking up the next one. She looked at him. That implies there's a next one. I think there's a next one. She didn't argue with that. They stood on the sidewalk afterward in the cold, and it was less awkward than the beginning had been, which felt like progress. He'd parked 2 blocks north. Her driver was waiting around the corner because Helena Bell did not deal with Ashbourne parking, which was a reasonable position. I had a good time, she said, despite the list. Me too, despite the list. She looked at him for a moment, just looked, openly, without the careful distance she usually maintained, and then she stepped forward and kissed him. Brief, quiet, deliberate. Her hand came up to his jaw, and she kissed him the way people kiss when they've thought about it for a while, and finally decided to stop not doing it. He kissed her back the same way. When she pulled back, she looked like herself, not flustered, not performed, just a woman who had done a thing she'd decided to do and wasn't going to pretend otherwise. Good night, Weston, she said. Good night, Helena. He walked to his car in the cold with his hands in his pockets, and the night felt different than it had an hour ago, which was either the beginning of something real or the beginning of a very significant problem, and he was honest enough with himself, admit to he couldn't tell the difference yet. He was at his desk the following Tuesday when his office phone rang, with a number he didn't recognize, a local Ashbourne area code, not his usual client's. He answered. You have a lot of nerve. Cameron's voice was controlled and tight in a way he recognized from the last 6 months of their relationship, the voice she used when she was furious and performing calm. I saw you at Meridian last Friday. I was there, Weston. I saw you at her table. He set down his pencil. Cameron. Don't. A breath. Don't do the thing where you start with my name in that quiet voice, because I am not in the mood for it. I want to know what was happening. I was having dinner, he said. I saw Helena sitting alone, and I sat with her for a little while before my client arrived. That's what was happening. That's not everything that was happening. He was quiet for a moment. He had promised Helena time, but he was also not going to actively lie about something that was already visible. I'm not going to lie to you, Cameron. Helena and I have spoken since then. The silence that followed was the kind that has texture. Spoken, she repeated. We had dinner Thursday at Harlow's on Clement. You took her, she stopped herself. You've been with me, Weston, for almost 2 years. And now you're what, asking my sister to dinner? You and I ended 4 months ago, he said, as evenly as he could manage. We both agreed it wasn't working. We were both relieved. He heard her breath catch at that last part and almost took it back, but didn't, because it was true and she knew it was true. I'm not doing something to you, Cameron. I'm not. There was no overlap. We were done. She's my sister. I know. She's my sister. And you know what that means. You know what it looks like. You know what it is. I know it's hard, he said. And I'm sorry that it is. I genuinely am. But I'm not going to pretend that I'm going to stop talking to her to make this easier, because that wouldn't be honest. And we both spent enough time not being honest with each other. Another silence. Longer. She knew. Cameron sits at lower now, the control fraying slightly at the edges. Didn't she? Helena knew something was she knew before Friday. I don't think it matters when. It matters to me. Her voice broke on the last word, just slightly, and then she pulled it back. You don't get to decide what matters to me, Weston. She's my sister, and she's always had everything. Do you understand that? Every single thing. And I had you, which you're right, it wasn't right. We weren't right. But she didn't have to take what wasn't working for me and make it work for her. He felt the weight of that. He let it land instead of deflecting it. Cameron, I hear you. I really do. But you know that's not... Don't explain my sister to me. Hard again. All the way hard. Stay away from her, Weston. I'm asking you that. I'm asking you to stay away from her. I can't do that. The call ended. He sat at his desk with the phone in his hand for a long moment, listening to the particular silence of someone having hung up on you. Then he set the phone down, picked up his pencil, and stared at the architectural drawings in front of him without seeing them for a while. He called Helena that evening. She called me too, Helena said, before he got there. About an hour ago. How did it go? As well as you'd expect. A pause. It was not a gentle conversation. She asked me to stay away from you. She asked me the same thing, essentially. He was sitting on his back porch. The October evening was cold enough to see his breath, which he was doing, watching it drift and dissolve into the dark yard. What did you tell her? I told her I wasn't going to do that. Helena's voice was steady, but he could hear something underneath the steadiness, not quite sadness, but close to it, something that knew the cost. I told her I love her, and I'm sorry this is painful, and I am not going to stop. She's going to need time, I know. A lot of it. Probably. A beat. Are you... She paused. Is this too... I want to ask you that, honestly. Because if it is, Helena, I'm serious. You have Maisie to think about, and your life, and I don't want you to feel like you walked into something you can't get back out of. Can I tell you something? He said. Yes. I changed my shirt 3 times before dinner on Thursday. Silence. Then, you what? You heard me. She made a sound that was somewhere between a laugh and something more complicated. Weston. I'm not going anywhere, he said. That's what I'm telling you. I know what the situation is. I'm not going anywhere. A long moment. Wind moved through the yard, pushing dead leaves across the patio concrete with a dry scraping sound. Okay, she said quietly. Okay, he said. He stayed on the porch a while, longer after they hung up, long enough to get genuinely cold, watching the light in the neighboring houses and thinking about the specific kind of difficult that was worth doing anyway. Then he went inside, checked on Maisie asleep, Rabbit tucked under her arm, the nightlight casting its soft arc across her face, and stood there for the better part of a minute, just being grateful for that particular thing. The rest of it he would figure out as it came. The following 3 weeks moved quickly and not easily. Cameron did not call again, but her absence was louder than her calls. Helena texted Weston most days, sometimes something significant, sometimes just a photo of something she'd seen that made her think of him. A crumbling brick building in a city she was traveling through, a coffee shop with a sign out front that said inflation is real, espresso now 6, which made him laugh out loud in the middle of a meeting and have to pretend he'd read something in his notes. She called 3 or 4 times a week, and they talked the way people talk when they're learning each other, not performing, but with the specific unself-consciousness of 2 people who've stopped trying to manage impressions. He told her about Maisie's tooth fairy negotiation, which had concluded with a compromise of $3, and the agreement that the ferry had overhead costs, a position Maisie accepted under protest. He told her about his brother in Memphis, Marcus, who was difficult and funny, and the person Weston was most like in ways that bothered him and made him proud in equal measure. He told her that he'd wanted to be an architect since he was 9 years old, and his father had taken him to see a restored theater in Nashville, and he'd stood in the lobby and felt the weight of what a building could hold, not just structurally, but in terms of human experience, and that feeling had never entirely left him. Helena told him about starting her company at 23 with a business plan she now described as aggressively naive, and 2 investors who believed in her for reasons she still didn't entirely understand. She told him about the year she'd worked 18-hour days and lost 12 pounds she didn't have to lose and didn't notice until a friend pulled her aside at a party and said, "Helena, you look like you're disappearing." She told him about the apartment she'd bought when the company first became profitable, too large, too expensive, too empty, and the way she'd furnished it very carefully with things she'd read were good and felt nothing in particular about any of them. "Do you like it?" he asked. "The apartment. I've stopped noticing it," she said, which I think is worse than not liking it. "You should put something bad in it," he said. "Bad how? Like ugly. Something you love that isn't impressive. Something you'd be embarrassed for a business journalist to photograph. She was quiet for a moment. I have a lamp, she said slowly, like she was confessing something, that I've had since college. It's genuinely hideous. It's this sort of orange-brown ceramic thing that looks like a gourd had a difficult life. I keep it in the closet. Get it out, he said. It's objectively terrible. Get it out and put it somewhere you can see it. A pause. That's absurd. Helena, I'll think about it. He found out 3 days later, via a photo she sent at 11 in the morning, that the lamp was now on her bedside table. No caption, just the image. He typed back, perfect. And despite the Cameron-shaped storm still building on the horizon, despite the complexity and the list and the very genuine complications of loving someone who lived at a different altitude than the rest of the world, despite all of it, standing in his kitchen, holding his phone and looking at a photo of the ugliest lamp he'd ever seen, Weston Avery felt something settle quietly in the center of his chest. Like a door opened, like a chair filled, like something that had been waiting a long time had finally been allowed to begin. The ugly lamp stayed on Helena's bedside table. Weston knew this, not because she mentioned it again, but because in the weeks that followed, whenever she sent him a photo from her apartment, a view of Ashbourne's skyline on a clear morning, a book she'd left open on the nightstand, a cup of coffee catching the early light, the lamp was always there in the corner of the frame. Never centered, never commented on, just present, the way things become present when they stop being something you have to think about and start being something that simply belongs. He noticed it every time and said nothing, and that felt right. November arrived with the particular gray stubbornness of Tennessee, in the early cold, not dramatic, not picturesque, just the slow draining of color from the world until the trees were bare, and the sky was the same dull pewter every morning. And you had to remember that the season had reasons for what it did. Weston's warehouse project hit a difficult stretch. A structural assessment had revealed load issues in the original eastern wall that his initial drawings hadn't fully accounted for, which meant 2 weeks of revised calculations, and a tense meeting with Dennis Farrow, in which Dennis said the word timeline 14 times in 40 minutes. Maisie caught a cold and was home for 3 days, during which she was simultaneously pitiful and demanding in the specific way of sick children wanting to be held, and also wanting to watch the same animated movie 4 times in a row, wanting soup and then not wanting soup, wanting company and then wanting quiet, cycling through these requirements with the capricious authority of someone who understood she was temporarily exempt from the usual rules. Weston worked from home those 3 days, laptop open on the kitchen table, while Maisie napped on the couch under 2 blankets, and somewhere in that stretch of ordinary difficulty he realized that he'd started texting Helena the small things, the 14th timeline mention, the soup negotiation, a photo of Maisie asleep with the stuffed rabbit on her face like a mask. Helena responded to all of it, not with the careful, considered replies of someone managing a relationship just naturally, as if the conversation was already continuous, and these were just more moments in it. Tell Maisie the soup is non-negotiable, she wrote at one point, coming from someone who once refused to eat anything green for an entire year. How did that resolve? My mother started putting spinach in smoothies and lying about it. I didn't find out until I was 19. Did you forgive her? I bought a blender. He was smiling at his phone when Maisie appeared in the kitchen doorway wrapped in her blanket, hair flattened on one side, looking at him with the suspicious, slightly unfocused assessment of someone recently woken. Who are you texting? She asked. A friend. The thinking face friend? He looked at her. Go back to the couch. Is it a girlfriend or a friend? Maisie. She considered him for another moment with the patience of someone who has all the time in the world and knows it, then turned and shuffled back to the couch, dragging her blanket behind her. He heard her settle, heard the television come back on, heard the opening notes of the animated movie for the 5th time. He looked back at his phone. My daughter just interrogated me, he typed. About you, in general terms. She's 6 and perceptive in ways that are frankly inconvenient. A pause. Then what did you tell her? That you're a friend? Is that enough for now? He thought about it. For now. He put the phone down and went to sit with Maisie on the couch, and she tucked herself against his side without breaking her focus on the screen, and he put his arm around her and watched a story he'd seen 5 times already and felt the particular fullness of a life that was, despite its complications and its open questions and its load-bearing walls that needed reassessment, genuinely his. They had their first argument on a Wednesday evening in mid-November, and it was about something small that was not actually about something small. Helena had a work event, a donor reception for a technology foundation she sat on the board of, held at a venue in downtown Ashbourne. She'd mentioned it 2 weeks earlier, and they'd agreed Weston would come. It wasn't a public announcement of anything, just him accompanying her to an event, the way people who are in the beginning of something real eventually have to do. But it was the first time they'd appear anywhere together, and he understood the significance even when he was pretending it was casual. At 4:30 that afternoon, Helena called. "I have to tell you something, and I don't want it to become a problem," she said, which was not a promising opening.
Okay.
"There's a photographer from the Ashbourne Business Journal coming tonight. Standard coverage. It's a public event. There'll be a few shots of the room, probably some of the board members." A pause. "I need you to know that before you come. Because if you're in a photo with me, people are going to ask questions, and I can't control what gets published." He was quiet for a moment. "Are you asking me not to come?" "No. I'm asking if you're comfortable with the possibility." "Helena." He kept his voice even. "Are you comfortable with it?" A longer pause than he expected. "That's why I'm calling." "That's not an answer. I know." He heard her exhale. I'm working on it. The public part. It's not that I'm ashamed of you, Weston. Please don't hear it that way. What should I hear it as? As me being honest with you about the fact that I have spent 10 years building a public identity that is extremely controlled and deliberate, and the idea of having something personal show up in it before I'm ready is genuinely frightening to me. Not because of you, because of me. He sat with that for a moment. Decided the honest version was better than the accommodating version. "Okay," he said, "but I need to say something back." "Go ahead." "I told you from the beginning I can't be something hidden. Not because of pride, but because of Maisie. When someone comes into my life significantly enough to matter, she's going to know about it eventually, and I can't have two categories, the public Weston and the real one. I can't do that to her, and I can't do it to myself." He paused. "I understand that your situation is different and more visible and more complicated. I'm not asking you to post something on the internet. I'm asking, is this something you actually want with your name on it? Because if it is, then a photographer at a donor reception is something we're just going to have to live with." Silence. "You're right," she said. "Not easily, but genuinely."
I know.
"I hate it a little bit when you're right." "I know that too." "I'll see you at 7, she said. And this time when she hung up there was nothing unresolved in it, just two people who had said the thing that needed saying and were moving forward. He wore the good jacket and got there at 5 to 7 and found her near the entrance talking to someone from the foundation board. And when she saw him, she did a small thing she probably didn't realize. She did. She straightened slightly. Not from tension, but from something that looked more like relief. The way people straighten when someone they were hoping for actually arrives. She crossed to him when she could, and touched his arm briefly in greeting and said, "Lo, you came." "I said I would." "I know." She looked at him. "Thank you." "Stop thanking me for showing up," he said. "It's becoming a pattern." She laughed at that real unguarded, and the person she'd been talking to glanced over with the mild curiosity of someone cataloging something, and neither Weston nor Helena looked away from each other to manage it. The photographer from the Business Journal did get a shot of them, later in the evening. Weston didn't notice when it happened, and Helena, who normally noticed everything, didn't notice either, which was probably its own form of answer. The photograph ran in the following week's digital edition under a caption that said Helena Bell, founder and CEO of Bell Meridian Group, at the Ashbourne Technology Foundation reception. Weston was partially visible at her shoulder, unnamed, turned slightly away. It was nothing. It was a corner of a photograph at a public event. Cameron saw it within an hour of publication. She didn't call. She showed up. Weston was home on a Saturday afternoon. Maisie was at a birthday party for another kid from her class, being dropped off and retrieved by the birthday girl's parents under an arrangement he'd confirmed 3 times because the kind of not then father who confirmed things 3 times, and he was in the kitchen, doing something about dinner when the doorbell rang. He knew before he opened the door. Cameron stood on his front porch in a wool coat, her hair pulled back tight, her face doing something he'd seen it do only a few times in 2 years. Not angry, not hurt, but past both of those into something colder and more deliberate. She was holding her phone. "Can I come in?" she asked. "Yes," he said, and stepped back. She came in, looked around his kitchen, the way people look at places they used to be comfortable in and are now experiencing differently, and didn't sit down. "I saw the photo," she said, "I know. So you're not even trying to keep it quiet. I wasn't trying to make it public either." It's a background shot at a public event, Cameron. It's my sister, Weston. Her voice cracked slightly on sister, just once, and she pushed past it. You're in a photograph at a public event with my sister, and people are going to see it and ask me about it, and I'm going to have to explain that my former boyfriend is that he's with. She stopped, set her phone face down on his kitchen counter. I told you to stay away from her. I know you did, and you did it anyway. Yes, he said, simply, without apology in his voice, because there was none available. Her jaw tightened. I need you to explain this to me. Not the version where you're being careful with my feelings, the actual version. When did this start? Not when you sat down at the table at Meridian. Before that. When? He pulled out a chair from the kitchen table and sat down. Not because he felt casual about this, but because standing for the whole conversation felt aggressive. I don't know exactly when, he said, but yeah, before that. I noticed it before that, while we were together. Yes. She looked at him for a long moment, her mouth pressed into a thin line. And Helena? She'd noticed it too. She didn't do anything about it either. Neither of us did anything. We were together, and then we weren't, and then I walked into a restaurant and made a bad decision or a good one. I don't know yet. He met her eyes. But I'm not going to lie to you about the timeline. You asked for the actual version. Cameron moved to the kitchen table and sat down across from him, which he hadn't expected. She was quiet for a moment, looking at her hands on the table. She always had everything, Cameron said. Not loudly. Not with performance. Just said it. Do you understand that? I don't mean she was spoiled. I mean she's always been more. Smarter, more driven, more successful. When we were growing up, every teacher I ever had knew Helena Bell, and I was Helena's younger sister. That was my introduction. Every room I walked into for the first 18 years of my life, that was who I was. She paused. And I worked, Weston. I worked so hard to be my own thing. And I have my own career and my own life, and I've made it mean something. But there's always something that Helena has that I... She stopped. He waited. You, she said finally, I thought you were mine. Just mine, not ours, not the family's. Not something Helena had touched and made better, or smarter, or whatever. You were this person I'd chosen, who'd chosen me back. And it wasn't contingent on any of it, not her company, not her reputation, not her being extraordinary at everything. Just me, just Cameron, not Helena's sister, she exhaled. And then you chose her anyway. The kitchen was very quiet. Cameron, he said, I didn't choose Helena over you. Our relationship ended because we wanted different things, you said it yourself. We were relieved, both of us. You know that's true. I know. What I had with you, what didn't work between us that was about us. Not about Helena. I know that too. Her voice was flat and tired. Knowing something doesn't fix how it feels. No, he agreed. It doesn't. She looked up. Does she make you happy? He didn't perform consideration. Yeah, she does. Something moved across Cameron's face, not acceptance. Not exactly, but the particular shift that happens when a person stops arguing against something they already know is true. She doesn't let people in, Cameron said. You probably think you know that, but you don't know how far it goes. She spent her whole career being the person everyone needs her to be, and she built this wall around anything personal. She doesn't talk about being lonely. She just adjusts. She looked at him. Whatever she's shown you, that's real. She doesn't fake that. I want you to understand that. I do understand it. If you hurt her, Cameron stopped, pressed her lips together. I'm furious at both of you. I want you to know that. I'm furious and I'm hurt, and I think this is the most complicated thing that has ever happened in my family, and it didn't have to be, and I'm going to need a significant amount of time to get anywhere near okay with it. She stood up, picked up her phone from the counter. But I'm not going to stand here and pretend I'm surprised. Not really. I saw how you two were, in rooms together, and I told myself I was imagining it. She turned toward the door. I wasn't imagining it. No, he said. I need you not to call me for a while. Okay. She stopped with her hand on the doorframe. Her back was to him. Is Maisie going to know her? If this continues, yes. A silence. She's a good kid, Maisie. She is. Helena's good with children. She doesn't talk about it, but she'd be good with Maisie. She said it like it cost her something, and she was paying it anyway. Then she walked out, and he heard the front door close behind her, and the kitchen was very quiet again. He called Helena that evening. She came to my house, he said. I know. She called me right after. It was different from the first call. Less. Helena paused, looking for the word. Less fire. More grief, I think. She told me things about growing up with you, Weston said. About always being your younger sister everywhere she went. Helena was quiet. Did you know she felt that way? I knew she found it difficult sometimes. I didn't know. She stopped. I didn't know the full shape of it. I thought I did. Another pause. I was always so focused on what I was trying to build. I didn't think about how the building looked from outside. She's not wrong, he said. That's a hard thing to grow up in the shadow of.
I know.
Her voice had a weight in it that was different from the Helena he'd seen managing difficult boardroom situations or complicated negotiations. This was the part that didn't have a strategic resolution. I need to actually talk to her. Not the way we've been talking around each other, about each other. I have to actually sit across from her and have the conversation we've been avoiding for about 20 years. Yeah, he said. I think you do. She's not going to make it easy.
No.
Probably not. And I'm also not going to make it easy. I have my own version of it, and it's not prettier than hers. She exhaled. Being the successful older sister isn't exactly a warm experience from the inside. You spend your whole life being the person everyone points to and says, look what's possible, and it never occurs to anyone to ask if you're happy, or lonely, or scared, because you've done such a thorough job of looking like someone who has it handled. When did you last tell Cameron you were lonely? He asked. A long pause. Never. When did she last tell you? Also never. So you've been in the same house for 30 years, he said, and you've both been lonely, and neither of you said it out loud. We're Bell women, Helena said. Saying things out loud it's not our first instinct. I noticed. You say that like it's a flaw. I say it like it's a thing I know about you, he said. Whether it's a flaw depends on what you do with it. She was quiet for a moment. He could hear her breathing, could imagine her somewhere in that carefully furnished apartment, probably standing at the window with the skyline behind her and the ugly lamp visible somewhere in the room. I'm going to call her, Helena said. Tomorrow. I'm going to ask her to meet me. Good. She might not come. She'll come, he said. She showed up at my house today when she didn't have to. She's still in this, she's just in pain. I know the feeling. He thought about what Cameron had said, standing in his kitchen with her hand on the doorframe, about to leave. She'd be good with Maisie. He hadn't told Helena that part. He'd file it away for later, for the right moment. Some things needed to arrive in their own time. Hey, he said. What? The lamp. Is it still there? A small pause.
Yes.
Good. She made the sound she made when something caught her off guard, not quite a laugh, not quite a sigh. You and that lamp. Just checking in on it. It's fine, Weston. The lamp is fine. He could hear the smile in it, ragged around the edges but real. I'm fine, I know, he said. That's different from you being okay. Yes, it is. You don't have to be okay tonight. Thank you, she said, quietly, like she meant it all the way down. Get some sleep, he said. You've got a hard phone call to make tomorrow, and you'll want your full capacity. My full capacity, she repeated. You say that like I'm a machine. You are many things, he said. A machine is about fourth on the list. What's first? He thought about it. Honest, he said. That's first. Another silence, warm this time, not weighted. Good night, Weston. Good night. He sat on the back porch again after hanging up, a habit he was developing, and thought about the specific texture of this thing he was in, the difficulty of it, the complication, the way it moved through people and between people and required things of everyone involved. He thought about Cameron in his kitchen and the grief under her anger, and Helena in her apartment that she'd never quite made hers, and Maisie asleep upstairs under 2 blankets with the stuffed rabbit that she'd die before admitting she still needed. He thought about what Cameron had asked. Does she make you happy? He thought about his answer, the speed of it, the absence of performance in it. Yeah, she does. It wasn't the simple kind of happy, the kind you got from easy circumstances and no friction. It was something more specific and more durable than that. The kind that came from being actually known by someone, being seen without the editing, and having them stay anyway. That was the kind worth the complication. That was the kind worth the list. He didn't hear from Helena for 2 days after that call, which he understood to mean the conversation with Cameron had happened and was being processed. Didn't push. He went to work, picked up Maisie from school, made dinner that was better than the rubbery eggs, sat with his daughter, while she told him about the various dramas of first grade, with the full gravity of someone reporting on international affairs. On the 3rd day, Helena texted him at 11 in the morning. We talked. For 3 hours. I'm not going to try to summarize it over text, it's too much and I'd do it wrong. But I want you to know it happened. He wrote back, how do you feel? A few minutes passed. Like I've been carrying a piece of furniture up a long flight of stairs and I finally put it down. Exhausted. Arms aching. But it's on the landing. He read that twice. That's a good image. I have my moments. Is she okay? She's not okay. But she's different. And I'm different. I think we might actually get somewhere. He set his phone down on his desk and looked at his architectural drawings for the warehouse project, the revised eastern wall calculations, the load distribution, the slow, careful work of making something structurally sound that would also be worth standing in. Buildings and people, he thought, were not entirely unalike. Sometimes the original assessment missed something important, and you had to go back to the bones, figure out where the weight was actually going, rebuild the design around what was true rather than what you'd initially assumed. He picked up his pencil and went back to work. That afternoon, he picked up Maisie from school, and she came out with a drawing she'd made a piece of paper with figures in crayon, labeled in her careful, still learning to spell handwriting. He looked at it while she climbed into her booster seat. There were 3 figures. A tall one labeled Daddy, a smaller one labeled Emmy, and a third one, slightly taller than Maisie, but shorter than Weston, with dark hair indicated by enthusiastic brown scribbling, labeled with careful effort, Helena. He looked at it for a long moment. "Who drew this?" he asked, though he knew. "I did," Maisie said, in free draw. "Mrs. Patterson said, draw someone who makes you smile, and I drew our family." He kept his voice very even. "You drew Helena. She makes you smile," Maisie said simply, as if this were entirely self-evident. "You do the thinking face, and then your phone goes, and then you smile. So." She buckled her seatbelt with the focused effort of someone who'd recently graduated to doing it herself. "Can we have pasta tonight?" Weston looked at the drawing for another second. The 3 crayon figures, slightly crooked, labeled with phonetic guesswork and complete certainty. He put it carefully in the cup holder and started the car. "Yeah," he said. "We can have pasta." He didn't tell Helena about the drawing that night. He wasn't ready to, and she wasn't ready to hear it, and there were still things that needed to move at their own pace. But he kept it. He brought it inside and set it on the kitchen counter, and later, when the pasta was done, and Maisie was fed and bathed and asleep, he looked at it one more time before going to bed. 3 figures, slightly crooked, labeled in a 6-year-old spelling. A family, drawn by someone who hadn't been asked what a family was required to look like, and had therefore drawn exactly what she saw. He folded it gently and put it in the drawer of his nightstand, and it was still there when he woke up the next morning, and the morning after that, and the morning after that. December arrived the way it always did in Ashbourne, gradually, and then all at once, the cold settling in properly, the city stringing lights along the downtown corridors, the whole world briefly agreeing to perform a version of warmth, even when the temperature said otherwise. Weston had always liked December for its honesty about that contradiction. Everyone knew the lights were partly theater, partly necessity, partly just the human refusal to sit in the dark without doing something about it. He respected that refusal. The warehouse project was, against most reasonable expectations, coming together. The Eastern Wall issue had resolved into something he was genuinely proud of, a solution that preserved the original brick while integrating the load redistribution into the design itself, making the structural fix visible and intentional rather than hidden. Dennis Farrow had walked through the revised drawings and said, with the slightly grudging approval of a man who had expected to be disappointed, "Okay, this is actually something." Which from Dennis was essentially a standing ovation. Maisie had lost a second tooth, negotiated the tooth fairy rate up to $3.50 on grounds that inflation had continued, and learned to read 2 new sight words in the same week, a combination of achievements she reported with the calm satisfaction of someone checking items off an important list. She was, at 6 years old, already better at project management than most adults Weston worked with. And Helena was becoming something he hadn't had a word for yet, something that didn't fit cleanly into any category he'd previously used. Not just a relationship, not just a person he was seeing. Something more architectural than that, something load-bearing. Something that had worked its way into the structure, rather than just leaning against the outside of it. They'd fallen into a rhythm without deciding to do. Tuesday and Thursday evenings, when he didn't have Maisie, she was at her grandmother's on those nights, a standing arrangement from before Weston and Cameron had even separated. He and Helena had dinner, sometimes at Harlow's, sometimes at her apartment, sometimes just take-out boxes on his kitchen table with work spread between them, because they were both people whose work didn't stop at 6 o'clock, and they'd both stopped pretending it did. Weekends were more complicated, more negotiated, more honest about the fact that his life had a particular shape, and Helena's was learning to fit into the actual shape rather than an idealized version of it. She'd met Maisie properly in early December. He'd thought about how to engineer it, had run through various scenarios, had ultimately decided the most honest approach was the simplest one. Helena came for dinner on a Saturday. Maisie was there, and they'd see how it went. He made lasagna because lasagna was the one dish he made reliably well under pressure, and he cleaned the house to the standard of someone, expecting someone whose standards were higher than his own. And he did not warn Maisie in excessive detail, because Maisie's imagination, when given too much briefing, tended to construct scenarios more elaborate than reality could deliver. He told her Helena was coming for dinner. A friend. The thinking face friend. Maisie had looked at him with her particular expression of 6-year-old Will's omniscience and said, "The one from my drawing." "Yes." "Okay," Maisie said, and went back to her book. Helena arrived at 6 with a bottle of sparkling cider, not wine. Cider, which Weston noticed in a small paper bag from a bookstore downtown that she was holding in a way that suggested she'd thought about it more than she intended to reveal. She was wearing jeans and a dark sweater, no heels, hair down. She dressed like a person coming to dinner at someone's house, rather than like Helena Bell, arriving anywhere, and he felt something specific about that choice. The first 20 minutes were, honestly, a little awkward. Maisie assessed Helena from across the room, with the frank, unblinking evaluation of a child who has not yet learned that staring is impolite and has no particular interest in learning it. Helena handled this by not performing anything she didn't go in for the excessive warmth some adults deploy on children as a kind of defensive strategy, the high-pitched enthusiasm that children can detect as inauthentic from considerable distance. She just said hi, sat down where Weston indicated, and asked if the lasagna she could smell was the dinner, or if there was something else coming. "That's the dinner," Weston said. "Good," Helena said. "It smells like it means something." Maisie, from across the room, said, "He makes it when it's important." Helena looked at her. "Has he made it for you before?" "When I was sick," Maisie said, "and when my hamster died. And once, when I was sad about a thing at school," she considered, "basically when things are a big deal." Helena looked at Weston. He shrugged, because there was nothing useful to say about that. Dinner was easier than the first 20 minutes had suggested it would be. Maisie ate with purpose and asked Helena questions with the directness of someone who hadn't yet been socialized into the idea that curiosity should be modulated. She asked what Helena's job was, and when Helena said she ran a company, Maisie asked what kind, and when Helena explained it simplified, honestly, in a way that showed she'd thought about how to make it comprehensible without being condescending. Maisie nodded and said, "So you're the boss?" "More or less." "My dad's the boss too," Maisie said. "At his work. But at home I'm the boss." "She's not wrong," Weston said. "That seems like a reasonable division of responsibility," Helena said, with the perfectly straight face she was very good at maintaining. After dinner, while Weston was clearing the table, Helena produced the paper bag from the bookstore. She set it on the table in front of Maisie without ceremony and said, "I didn't know what you liked, so I asked the person at the store who actually knows children's books, and she said this one was very good." Maisie pulled out a picture book, a story about a girl who builds things, bridges and towers, and improbable structures, solving problems in unconventional ways. She looked at the cover for a moment, then opened it and looked at the first page. Then she closed it and looked at Helena. "She builds things," Maisie said. "She does. Like my dad. I thought about that," Helena said. Maisie looked at the book again. Something in her small face settled into a decision. "You can read it with me," she said. Not a question. A grant of permission, which carried its own weight. "I'd like that," Helena said. Weston stood at the kitchen sink and listened to Helena, read to his daughter in the other room, heard Helena's voice less guarded than it was in any other context, following the words on the page, heard Maisie's occasional questions and comments, heard the particular silence of a child being genuinely absorbed in a story, and he gripped the edge of the sink for a second because the feeling in his chest was so disproportionately large for a Saturday night in December that it caught him completely off guard. He stood there until it passed to something he could breathe around. Then he dried his hands and went to sit on the opposite end of the couch. The story was 12 pages. It took 25 minutes because Maisie had thoughts about most of them. He showed Helena the drawing that night, after Maisie was asleep. He'd kept it in the nightstand drawer for weeks, not sure when it would be the right moment. He got it out now, unfolded it carefully, and set it on the coffee table between them. Helena looked at it. She was quiet for a long time. Long enough that he started to wonder if he'd misjudged. "She spelled my name wrong," Helena said. "She's 6. Helena." She said it softly, tracing the letters with her eyes. Two E's. She felt strongly about the second E. Helena looked at the drawing, the three crooked crayon figures, the enthusiastic brown scribbles for dark hair, the deliberate labeling. She looked at it long enough that he saw something shift in her face, something that was usually very well managed. When did she draw this? Helena asked. Before you met. A few weeks back at school. Free draw time. She told me she drew someone who makes you smile. Helena pressed her lips together, looked at the drawing again. She'd never met me, no. She watched you and she stopped, set the drawing down, looked at the wall for a moment. I'm not going to cry about a child's drawing, she said, in the tone of someone telling themselves not to do something they are already doing. Okay, he said, I'm serious. I believe you. She reached up and pressed two fingers to the corner of her eye, a precise and slightly defiant gesture. I run a company, she said, a big one, he agreed, with 11 international offices. I know. She looked at him, and her eyes were wet in a way she was very much not acknowledging, and he was not going to make her acknowledge it. She put me in the family, Helena said. She did. Without being asked. Without being asked. She picked the drawing back up and looked at it one more time, then set it down gently. You keep it somewhere safe, she said. Already do. She nodded, and the wetness in her eyes did not become anything else, because Helena Bell had extremely good composure even in the face of things that deserved to dissolve it. And by the time she looked at him again, she'd put herself back together in the particular way she had not closed off, but recollected, like books gathered back to a shelf after falling. She's remarkable, Helena said. Your daughter. She has her moments. She assesses people directly, without pretense. A pause. I wish I'd been able to do that at 6. I think I would have saved myself considerable difficulty. She learned it on her own, Weston said. I can't take credit for it. You can take some. He shook his head. Some things are just who people are. You try to give them enough room for it. Helena looked at him with the expression that he now understood meant she was recalibrating something, updating the model, adjusting an assumption she'd been carrying. You're a good father, she said, not performing the compliment, just stating it the way she stated facts. I'm trying to be, he said. It's the one thing I don't want to get wrong. You're not getting it wrong. She said it with the precision of someone who had spent months watching and was now reporting her findings. I want you to know that, because I suspect you worry about it more than you let on. He didn't deny it. They sat together on his couch for another hour, talking the way they'd gotten good at, talking not about what was careful or strategic, just about the actual things. He told her the warehouse project was nearly done, that he was already thinking about the next thing, that he had an idea for a bid he wanted to put in on a mixed-use development project on the south side of Ashbourne that would be significant if it came through and a long shot if it didn't. She told him about a board meeting that week in which someone had tried to maneuver her into a position she'd seen coming 3 moves ahead, the particular exhaustion of always having to see 3 moves ahead, of never being able to just trust that the room was safe. Do you ever get tired of it? He asked. The management, the seeing ahead. All the time, she said. But I don't know how to stop doing it. It's been 10 years. The habit is very deep. You're not doing it right now. She looked at him. No, she said, I'm not. She seemed to find this notable. I'm not, she said again, quieter. That's something, he said. It is, she said, it really is. The thing with Cameron came to a head on a Thursday, in the second week of December, and it came from a direction Weston hadn't fully anticipated. He was at his office when the text arrived not from Cameron, not from Helena, but from an unknown number that turned out, when he read the message, to belong to Cameron's best friend, a woman named Petra, who he'd met 4 or 5 times during the relationship, and who he associated mainly with the memory of a birthday party where she'd spent an hour telling him about a podcast she hosted. The message was brief. Cam told me I shouldn't contact you. Ignore this if you want. But she's not okay and she won't talk to Helena and she's been alone with this for weeks. I don't know what you can do, but I thought you should know. He stared at the message for a while. Then he called Marcus. His brother picked up on the 3rd ring, with the sound of something mechanical in the background. Marcus worked in automotive restoration, a fact that had always struck Weston as either ironic or entirely predictable depending on your perspective, since Marcus had spent their whole childhood taking things apart to understand how they worked, and had simply made it his profession. You're calling in the middle of a Thursday, Marcus said. That's not your pattern. I need to think out loud at someone. That's what I'm here for. What's the situation? Weston ran through it, not the whole thing. Marcus already knew the broad shape from a call 2 weeks back, just the current configuration. Cameron in pain and not talking. The text from Petra. The fact that he was not technically anyone's responsibility here anymore, but felt the weight of it regardless. You want to know if you should do something, Marcus said. I want to know if doing something is interference or just being a decent person. Those aren't mutually exclusive. I know. That's the problem. Marcus was quiet for a moment in the way he got quiet when he was thinking rather than filling space. What could you do, specifically? I could reach out to her. Check in. Not about Helena, not about any of it, just check in. Let her know that the fact that we didn't work doesn't mean she doesn't matter. Would that be honest, that she matters? Yeah, Weston said. She does. She's not my favorite person right now, and I think she's made this considerably harder than it had to be. But I spent almost 2 years with her, and I don't write people off. Then do it, Marcus said. Not to fix it, not to resolve anything. Just because it's true. You make it sound simple. It is simple. It might be painful, but it's simple. A beat. How's the Helena situation? Good, Weston said. Really good. Which is part of why the Cameron part is hard. I can't fully enjoy something that someone I used to care about is hurting over. You know that's not your responsibility. I know. You're going to carry it anyway. Yeah, Weston said. Probably. That's why you're good at your job, Marcus said. You see where the weight is and you account for it. It's also why you're occasionally a pain in the ass. He paused. Call Cameron. Keep it short. Just say the human thing. The human thing. You know what the human thing is. You always know. You just second guess it. Weston sat at his desk for another minute after he hung up. Then he pulled up Cameron's number still in his contacts, which said something about either loyalty or his failure to maintain his contacts list. Probably both. And he wrote her a text. I heard from Petra that you're having a hard time. I'm not reaching out about Helena or about anything complicated. I just wanted to say that the fact that we didn't work doesn't mean I stopped caring whether you're okay. I hope you're okay, Cameron. That's the whole message. He sent it before he could reconsider. She didn't reply that day, or the next. On Saturday morning, while Maisie was at her school's winter craft fair, his phone showed Cameron's name. I got your text, she said. Her voice was different, not the controlled coldness of the kitchen visit, not the tight fury of the phone call in October. Just tired. I wasn't going to respond, I figured. But then I kept picking it up and reading it. A pause. You meant it. I always meant things, he said. That wasn't our problem. A silence that held some truth in it, the way silences between people who know each other well sometimes do. No, she said, it wasn't. He waited. Can I ask you something? Cameron said. Yes. Did you mean what you told her? When Helena said you told her you weren't going anywhere, did you mean it the way it sounds? Yeah, he said. I meant it that way. Another silence. She never lets people in, Cameron said. I told you that before. I need you to understand what I'm saying. She has spent her entire adult life keeping a kind of distance, even from people she's supposed to be close to, even from me. And I know that's partly about who she is, and partly about what happened with our father, and partly about building this company where everyone always wants something from her, and partly about 10 years of being the person everyone needs to be functional, so you can never afford to not be functional yourself. She took a breath. And somehow she's different with you. I've seen it twice now, and I don't entirely know what to do with it, but I see it. I know, Weston said, not arrogantly. Just confirming that he saw it too. I need you to take care of it, Cameron said. Not her she doesn't need taking care of. I mean that thing. That different, the way she is when she's with you. Her voice got something complicated in it. Don't let her convince herself it's too much or too complicated or too something, because she will. She's done it before. Anytime something matters too much, she finds a reason to make it sensible to walk away. She calls it being realistic. A beat. Don't let her be realistic about you. Weston felt the full weight of what Cameron was doing, what it cost her to say this, what it meant that she was saying it anyway. I won't, he said, and Weston. Yeah, don't make her smaller, Cameron said. Whatever happens. Don't need her to be less so that you can feel like more. She's done that. She's done that with people before, made herself smaller so someone else could feel adequate. And it hollowed her out in ways she's still putting back. A pause. She's the most capable person I've ever been angry at. That's still true. Don't waste that. I have no interest in her being smaller, he said. I need her to be exactly the size she is. Good, Cameron said. The tiredness was still there, but something under it had shifted. Good. They talked for another 10 minutes, not about Helena, not about the complication. Just two people who had tried something together, and it hadn't worked and were finding the aftershape of that, where you still know each other, but the knowing has to rearrange itself into something new. It was not comfortable. Comfort was not what either of them was going for. They were going for honest, and honest was harder but more useful. And by the time they ended the call, there was something that was not yet okay, but was no longer entirely broken. He called Helena that evening. "I talked to Cameron today," he said, a sharp intake of breath. "She called you?" "I called her first. Reached out." He explained about Petra's text, about the decision to say the simple human thing. "Then she called back today." "What did she say?" He thought about how to do this, what to give Helena, and what to let Cameron keep as her own. Some of what Cameron had said was a gift intended for him to act on rather than pass through. "She said some things I needed to hear," he said, "and some things she probably needed to say. I think she's working her way toward something." Toward what? Toward letting this be a thing that happened in her family without it being a wound she carries forever. He paused. "I think she needs to talk to you again. Actually talk, the way you did before the 3 hours, not the phone call version. She's been avoiding me. I know. Try again." Helena was quiet. He could hear the particular quality of her thinking, not vacant, not drifting, but focused and slightly reluctant, the way she got when she could see the correct path, and the correct path was going to take something out of her. "Okay," she said, "I'll try again." "And Helena?" "What?" "She said some things about you. Good things. Hard ones for her to say." He chose his words. "She sees you clearly. More clearly than you might know." A long silence. "She's maddening," Helena said. "Your sisters," he said. "That seems accurate." "I love her," Helena said, simply, without conditions around it. "I know. That's why this has been as hard as it's been. And why it has to get somewhere." "Yeah." He thought about the phone call with Cameron, the specific things she'd said that he was still turning over. "Don't let her be realistic about you." He hadn't told Helena that part. Maybe he would, eventually. Or maybe it was enough to just act on it, to be the person who didn't require diminishing, who didn't need Helena to make herself manageable, who could sit across from all of her and not flinch. "Hey," he said. "What? I need to tell you something." Her voice shifted into the slightly braced quality of someone who expects significant news. "All right, I'm in love with you." Silence, not the calculating kind, not the kind she used when she was managing her response. Just silence, the kind that falls when something true arrives without warning, and you need a second to find yourself on the other side of it. "Weston," she said, "I know the timing is. I know there's still a lot that's unsettled. I'm not saying it to put pressure on anything. I'm saying it because it's been true for a while and I've been carrying it, and tonight, I didn't want to carry it anymore without you knowing." Another silence, shorter. "I'm in love with you too," Helena said. Not quickly, not the way people sometimes mirror a declaration out of social reflex. Slowly, like she was setting something down that she'd been holding for a long time. I've known it for a while. I kept trying to find the right time, which is a very me thing to do. Finding the right time, as if love has a strategic window. Does it? I don't think so, she said. I think it just arrives. And then you deal with it. How are you dealing with it? Poorly, she said, and it came out warm. Beautifully poorly. He smiled at that. That's a good way to deal with it. It's the only way I know how. A pause. Weston. Yeah, the lamp is still there. He laughed, a real one, unplanned, the kind that comes from somewhere lower than performance. I know, he said. I look at it every morning, she said. And every morning I think this is the most hideous object I own. And it's the truest thing in the room. And I am genuinely in love with the man who told me to get it out of the closet. Good, he said. Good, she said. He told Maisie the following weekend. Not in a large way, not with a formal talk, because Maisie was 6 and formal talks were not her preferred mode of receiving information. He told her while they were making pancakes on a Sunday morning, a collaborative effort that involved Maisie standing on her stepping stool and stirring with more enthusiasm than precision. Hey, he said. You know Helena. The thinking face person, Maisie said. Yeah. She's going to be around more. Like she and I are together. Do you know what that means? Maisie stirred. Like boyfriend-girlfriend? Yeah, something like that. Maisie considered this for a moment with the gravity of a small person handling significant information. She reads good, she said. She does. And she didn't pretend I was cute when I wasn't being cute. Petra does that, and it's annoying. Helena's honest, Weston agreed. Okay, Maisie said, stirred again. Can she come for pancakes? If you want her to. I want her to, Maisie said decisively. But she has to stir. Stirring's important. I'll let her know. Maisie nodded, satisfied, and went back to the batter with renewed focus. And Weston stood beside her at the stove and thought about the specific grace of a child who decides something, and then simply incorporates it, no drama. No extended negotiation with herself, just the clean movement, from considering to accepting that adults spend years trying to learn and usually don't quite manage. He texted Helena, "You've been invited to pancakes. There's a stirring requirement. Maisie is serious about this." Helena's response took about 40 seconds. "Tell her I take stirring very seriously and will not let her down." Then after a pause, "Also, did she just invite me?" He typed, "She did." Another pause. He could almost hear her recalibrating. "I'll be there at 9, she sent. Then, "I'm not going to say anything else about that, because I'll do the thing where I try to be composed and fail." "Don't be composed," he wrote back. "Just come." She came, and she stirred, with the careful, focused attention she brought to everything that mattered to her, while Maisie supervised with the watchful authority of someone whose standards were very clear. The pancakes came out imperfect and slightly uneven on the edges, the way pancakes do when two people are paying more attention to each other than to the pan. And they ate them at the small kitchen table with the winter light coming in through the window. And nobody said anything significant, and nobody needed to. Some things don't announce themselves. They just take up residence, quietly and without ceremony, until one day you look around and realize the shape of your life has changed, not because anything dramatic was done to it, but because the right things were gradually, imperfectly, stubbornly allowed in. Weston looked across the table at his daughter, and the woman who had arrived in his life through a window on an October night. A woman he hadn't been looking for, in a situation he hadn't planned, on a list of reasons that said don't but meant pay attention. He paid attention, and what he saw the syrup on Maisie's chin that neither of them mentioned, the specific way Helena held her coffee cup with both hands like it was something worth keeping warm, the brown crayon hair he'd first noticed through a restaurant window, and somehow never stopped seeing, was nothing close to perfect, and better than anything on his list had prepared him for. He got up to get more orange juice, and on his way past Helena's chair he touched her shoulder, just briefly the way you touch something you're glad is there, and she looked up at him with the expression that had no performance in it and never had. "More orange juice?" he asked. "Please," she said, and December kept going, unimpressed and unhurried, doing what December did, keeping the lights on, staying cold, giving people reasons to stay at the table a little longer than they needed to. The year turned without ceremony. New Year's Eve was Maisie at her grandmother's, sparklers in the backyard and hot chocolate, and falling asleep before midnight the way 6-year-olds do, regardless of their stated intentions. Weston spent the evening at Helena's apartment, not at a party, not at an event, just the two of them, and takeout from a Thai place they'd discovered in November, and had been returning to with the loyalty of people who know when they've found something worth keeping. They watched the city's fireworks from her window, the Ashbourne skyline briefly performing something like joy, and when midnight arrived, it arrived quietly between them, without the pressure of a moment that has to mean something, because the calendar says so. It meant something anyway. That was the difference. January was cold and workable. Weston submitted the bid for the Southside Development Project, the mixed-use build he'd told Helena about in December, the long shot, and settled in for the particular patience required when you've done everything you can do and the rest is out of your hands. The warehouse project wrapped in the second week of the month, and Dennis Farrow sent him a bottle of good whiskey and a referral to 2 colleagues who turned out to be serious, which was the best possible professional outcome and the kind of thing that happened when the work was actually good rather than just finished. Helena was in Seoul for 6 days in January, Tokyo for 4 days in February. The distance was a real thing, not a metaphorical challenge, not a cinematic obstacle with a clean resolution, but a practical, logistical fact about the life she had built, and that Weston had agreed to stand beside. He missed her in a way that was inconvenient and uncomplicated, the simple daily texture kind of missing that doesn't make for interesting drama, but is perhaps the truest measure of how much someone has become part of the pattern of your days. He sent her photos of things she would have noticed if she'd been there, a building on his walk to the office that had beautiful original stonework nobody seemed to pay attention to, a sunset that came in sideways through his office window and made the whole room amber for about 4 minutes, Maisie's Valentine's Day card for her class, which included a drawing of what Maisie described as a heart, but also kind of a dog. Helena sent him things back. An image of a market in Seoul she'd stopped at on her way to a meeting. All color and noise and life. A hotel room in Tokyo with a view of the city at night that went on so far it looked invented. A photo one morning, just of her hand holding a coffee cup with a partial view of the window behind it, and in the corner of the frame, barely visible, the orange-brown shape of the ceramic lamp. She'd brought it with her. He called her immediately. "You brought the lamp to Tokyo," he said. "It travels well," she said. Helena. The room was nice, but it felt like a hotel room, she said, with the careful absence of feeling in her voice that meant she was having a feeling she wasn't sure she wanted to name. "And I put it on the nightstand, and it felt like somewhere." He didn't say anything for a moment, because some things are better received in silence than in words, and he'd learned that about her specifically, that she's offered things obliquely sometimes, the important ones, and the right response was to accept them without making her explain what she'd already said. "Good," he said. "Good that it helped." "It's a terrible lamp," she said. "It's the best lamp I've ever seen." "You've lost perspective." "Probably," he said. "When do you land?" "Thursday." "Late. Don't wait up." "I won't," he said, knowing full well he would, and she probably knew it too, and neither of them said anything about it. February brought the moment with Cameron that none of them had engineered and all of them had been waiting for. It came on a Sunday unremarkably. Helena had been seeing Cameron separately. They'd had 3 dinners since December, just the two of them. The long-deferred, honest conversations happening in pieces, the way real conversations between people with history always do, not in one cathartic session, but gradually revisiting things from new angles as the initial heat cooled and what was underneath became accessible. She reported these dinners to Weston the way someone reports the progress of a difficult project, not dramatically, not with excessive analysis, just, "Here's where we are, here's what moved, here's what still has some way to go." What Weston hadn't anticipated was Cameron calling him directly one Sunday afternoon in February and asking if she could come by. Not to resolve anything, she said. Not to have a necessary conversation. Just to come by, he said yes. She arrived at 3, when Maisie was doing homework at the kitchen table, with the focused misery of someone who has been told that reading comprehension worksheets have to happen before screen time and has accepted this under protest. Cameron came in and stopped at the kitchen entrance when she saw Maisie, who looked up with the frank assessment she applied to all new arrivals. "Hi," Maisie said. "Hi," Cameron said. "I'm Cameron." "I know," Maisie said. "My dad has a picture of you from when you guys were from before." She returned to her worksheet. "You're pretty." Cameron looked at Weston, who lifted both hands slightly in the gesture of a man who has given up trying to moderate his daughter's observations. They sat in this living room while Maisie worked. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't supposed to be. Cameron didn't perform ease, and Weston didn't pretend the history between them wasn't in the room, sitting in the chairs like additional guests. "I'm not here to relitigate anything," Cameron said. I needed to see it. The actual thing. Not in my head, not the version I've been carrying around, but the actual reality of what's happening." She looked around his living room, the drawings on the refrigerator visible from the doorway, the architectural books stacked on the coffee table, the general texture of a life that was his. "I've been making this into a story," she said, "in my head. And stories are almost always worse than the real thing." Usually, Weston agreed. "Is she happy?" Cameron asked, not looking at him, looking at her hands in her lap. "My sister. Is she actually happy, or is she performing it?" "She's not performing it," Weston said. "She tried to in the beginning. It's a habit she has. She stopped being able to keep it up sometime around November." Cameron was quiet. "She told me about the lamp." He smiled despite himself. "She did? At dinner. She described it in significant detail, the color, the shape, the fact that she brought it to Tokyo." Cameron shook her head slowly. "Helena has never, in 30 years, traveled with anything that wasn't functional. She has a system. Carry on only if possible. Everything planned, nothing extra." She looked at him. "She packed a lamp. She needed somewhere to feel like," said. Cameron pressed her mouth together and looked at the ceiling briefly, which was something Helena also did when she was managing a feeling she hadn't entirely decided to have. He noticed the gesture and said nothing about it, but he thought, sisters through and through, even the gesture's the same. "I've been unfair to you," Cameron said, specifically. "Not about I had reasons for what I felt. I still think they were real reasons, but I was unfair in how I aimed them." She didn't rush the next part, just let it be awkward for a moment. "You were right that we were done. We were done before we were done, and we both knew it, and I kept that from being what it was because it was easier to be in something imperfect than to be alone, and I used you for that, and you were too decent to call me on it." A breath. "So, I'm saying it now." "Cameron, I'm not looking for absolution," she said. "I just needed to say it to your face. Not to Helena, not to Petra, not to myself at 2 in the morning. She looked at him. "You're good, Weston. You were always good. I think I resented that sometimes because it made me feel like the difficult one by comparison, which is probably information about me. He sat with that for a moment. You're not the difficult one, he said. You're a person who is carrying a lot of things that didn't belong to you and passing some of the weight along. That's very human. It hurt people, yeah. And you're here saying so. That's also very human. From the kitchen, Maisie's voice, Dad, what does comprehend mean? It means understand, he called back. A pause. Then why don't they just say understand? Good question. Write it down and ask your teacher. A grumbling sound, then the scratch of pencil on paper. Cameron was almost smiling. Almost, she's something, she said. She really is. Helena, she stopped, tried again. When I was with Helena last week, she was telling me about Maisie's pancake stirring requirements. And she was laughing. Not the polished Helena laugh, not the she was actually laughing, the kind she used to do when we were kids, before she decided laughing too much made her look undisciplined. Cameron's voice got something complicated in it. I haven't seen her laugh like that since we were maybe 14. Weston didn't say anything. Take care of it, Cameron said. The same word she'd said on the phone in December, but landing differently now, with less grief in them, and something that was edging toward genuine. Take care of that laugh. That's my full intention, he said. She left an hour later, and it wasn't resolved, not entirely, not cleanly, because the things between people who have shared history don't resolve so much as they reorganize, find new configurations, settle into forms that are livable, if not entirely without friction. But she left differently than she'd arrived, and Maisie said bye from the kitchen without looking up, and Cameron said bye back, and the door closed, and the afternoon went on. That evening he told Helena she was quiet for a long time. She apologized to you, Helena said. She said what she needed to say. That's for Cameron. She stopped. He heard her exhale. She doesn't do that. She never does that. She did today. Another silence. I don't know what's happening to my sister, Helena said, but I think I like it. I think she's just getting tired, Weston said, of carrying all the weight of the story she built. It's exhausting. That much weight. I know the feeling. I know you do, he said. You've been putting yours down all year. A long quiet on the line, the comfortable kind. Weston, she said. Yeah, I want to meet your brother. He hadn't expected that. Marcus, you talk about him like he's important. I want to meet the people who are important to you. A pause. If that's good, he said. He'll like you. He likes people who say what they mean. I'll try to keep that up. You've been pretty consistent so far. Only with you, she said. I'm still working on the rest of the world. One person at a time, he said. That's how it works. Spring came eventually, the way spring does in Tennessee, not announced, just gradually present. The gray lettings in, small amounts of green at the edges, until one morning you walk outside and realize the world has been quietly putting itself back together while you were paying attention to other things. The South Side development bid came through in March. Weston sat in his office and read the email twice before it fully registered. It was the biggest project he'd been awarded, the kind that would take 18 months and require him to hire another designer, the kind that meant something about the trajectory of what he was building. He called Marcus first, because some things you tell your brother before you tell anyone. Marcus said I knew it without hesitation, which was probably not entirely accurate, but was the right thing to say. Then he called Helena. She picked up in the middle of what sounded like a meeting. He could hear background voices, and she said, "Give me 2 minutes." And apparently put the meeting on pause, because 40 seconds later the background was gone. She said, "What happened?" "The South Side project," he said. "We got it." The sound she made was not professional and not composed, and was entirely, perfectly Helena. "Weston," she said. "Yeah, that's enormous." "I know. You've been working toward this for a while," he said. "Yeah. How do you feel?" He thought about it. He was sitting at his desk in his office, the same office he'd had for 6 years, the same view of the Ashbourne street below, the same architectural drawings taped to the wall, the same pencils in the same cup. Everything the same and not the same at all. Like someone who has been building toward something for a long time and is now standing at the place where it starts to be real, he said. Terrified, grateful, ready, all three at once. All three at once. Good, she said. That's how you know it matters. He heard her smile. Go celebrate. Take Maisie somewhere she wants to go. She'll want the trampoline park. Then go to the trampoline park. You should come. A pause. To a trampoline park. Helena. I haven't been to a trampoline park since. She stopped. I don't think I've ever been to a trampoline park. Then it's overdue. She laughed, the real one. The one Cameron had described from when they were kids. I have to finish this meeting, obviously. I'll meet you there at 6. She showed up at 6:03 in jeans and sneakers, looking like someone who had made deliberate choices about being a person rather than a presence. And Maisie grabbed her hand immediately upon arrival and pulled her toward the foam pit with the authority of a child who has decided someone is hers and is acting accordingly. Weston stood back for a moment and watched Helena allow herself to be pulled, not graciously, not performing willingness, but actually just going, a little uncertain, a little off balance, laughing at herself before she'd even gotten there. He took a photo. He would keep it forever. Helena Bell, billionaire, 11 international offices, 22 rounds of negotiated contract terms, standing at the edge of a foam pit in a Tennessee trampoline park, being held by the hand of a 6-year-old who had drawn her into a family before they'd ever met. He did not post the photo anywhere. It was not for anywhere. It was for the nightstand drawer alongside the drawing with 2 E's. The question of the ring arrived in Weston's mind sometime in late spring and refused to leave. He didn't rush toward it, and he didn't retreat from it. He just let it exist, turned it over the way you turn over a structural problem, looking at it from different angles, checking the load-bearing elements, making sure what he was planning to build could actually hold what he was putting on it. He was not a man who made large decisions impulsively. He'd sat in a parking lot for 20 minutes after a phone call. He'd changed his shirt 3 times. He took his time with things that mattered. But he also knew, had known for a while, the way you know things you don't always acknowledge, because acknowledging them commits you to acting on them, that Helena was not a variable in his life. She was not a chapter, not a season. She had ceased being something he was trying out and become something he was building around. And that transition had happened so gradually and so thoroughly that by the time he noticed it, it was already true. He talked to Marcus in April. Marcus said, "It's about time," which was almost certainly not accurate in terms of objective timeline, but was accurate in terms of the brother knowledge he'd been carrying since December. He talked to Maisie in May, in the most Maisie-appropriate way he knew how, which meant being direct and concrete and not performing the gravity of it. "Hey," he said, on a Saturday morning, pancakes again, because pancakes had become their serious conversation setting. "I want to ask Helena something important. About the future. About us being about all of us being together. Like a family. How do you feel about that?" Maisie put her fork down. The seriousness with which she received this would have been funny if it hadn't been so genuine. "Like forever?" she asked. "That's the idea." She thought about it. Actually thought, not performed thought. He waited. "She cried at my drawing," Maisie said. He looked at her. "You saw that?" "I was watching from the hallway," Maisie said without apology. "Because you took a long time in your room, and I wanted to see." He set his own fork down. "And?" "People only cry about the real things," Maisie said, with the authority of a 7-year-old who has arrived at a correct conclusion by unknown methods. She didn't have to cry about my drawing. I'm not even that good at drawing yet. She picked her fork back up. "Ask her, Dad." "Okay," he said. "But don't do it at the trampoline park." "That's weird." Noted. "Somewhere nice," she said, "where she'd wear a nice dress." He thought about an emerald dress, a table by a window, a candle between an empty chair and a woman who had not let herself fall apart in public, who had held a menu she wasn't reading, and waited for something or someone or nothing at all, and hadn't known, in that moment, that anything was about to begin. "I know a place," he said. He made the reservation at Meridian for a Friday in October, exactly 1 year from the night he'd stood on the sidewalk and looked through a window and made the decision that changed the shape of everything. He told Helena he was taking her to dinner, somewhere nice, dress accordingly. She said she'd been to exactly 1 meeting that day where someone tried to argue that a contractual clause she'd flagged was not really a problem for 40 minutes, before finally conceding that it was in fact exactly the problem she'd said it was. So yes, she would very much like to wear something nice and eat food she hadn't made, and sit across from someone who agreed with her conclusions without requiring 40 minutes of evidence first. "I think I can manage that," he said. "I'm setting the bar low for you tonight," she said. "I'll clear it," he said. She wore the emerald dress. He didn't know if she'd planned it that way, or if it was coincidence or something in between the dress she'd worn exactly 1 year ago. The night she'd sat alone at a table set for 2 and held a menu she wasn't reading. He saw it when she came down the elevator of her building and he was standing in the lobby, and something in his chest did something so significant he had to make a genuine effort not to show it on his face. "What?" she said, reading him anyway, because she always read him. "Nothing," he said. "You look nothing." She looked down at herself. The dress. Yeah, she looked up at him. Something crossed her face, the recognition, the year of it. I didn't plan it, she said. I opened the closet, and it felt right. I don't know why. I know why, he said. They took her car to Meridian. The same host stand, the same low light, the same jazz that tried not to be noticed. He had requested the same table, the one by the window, the one that had a second chair that had been empty for 45 minutes 1 year ago. It was set for 2 again. The candle was lit. There was no wrapped gift this time, no untouched wine glass already waiting. Just the table, and the 2 of them, and the October evening pressing against the glass outside. They ordered. They talked easy, the way it had become easy, the way you talk with someone when you know them well enough that the conversation doesn't need a topic, just 2 people in a room being interested in what the other one is thinking. She told him about the contract clause, animated about it in the way she got animated about things that required precision, her hands making points in the air above the breadbasket. He told her the South Side project was ahead of schedule, which Dennis Farrow, who was peripherally involved, had declared statistically improbable in a way that Weston was choosing to take as a compliment. Midway through dinner, Helena looked at the table for a moment, then out the window, then back at him. "This is the table," she said. "Yes, the same one. I requested it." She was quiet for a moment, taking the full weight of that in. The October street outside was doing what October streets do, people moving through cold air with their coats on, headlights going by, the city's ordinary evening proceeding without any awareness of what was happening at a particular table by a particular window. 1 year ago, Helena said, "I was sitting here alone. I'd gotten a 45-minute notice text, and I had a gift I'd bought for someone who wasn't coming, and I was holding a menu I wasn't reading because I needed something to hold." She turned her wine glass slowly. "And I was sitting there thinking, this is what it is. This is the thing where you try and it doesn't work and you sit in the evidence of it, and then you go home and you adjust and you keep going. Because that's what I did. I adjusted and kept going. That was the entire strategy. And then I walked in," Weston said. "And then you walked in," she said, "and asked me something ridiculous. It wasn't ridiculous. It was extremely ridiculous." She looked at him with warmth that had no performance in it. It was also exactly right. He reached into his jacket pocket. The ring was simple, he'd chosen it himself, without consulting anyone except the jeweler and his own understanding of Helena, which was by now fairly complete. Not showy, not a statement, not the kind of thing that announced itself across a room. A single stone, good quality, set low and clean. Something she could wear at a board meeting and a trampoline park with equal ease. Something that looked like a decision rather than a display. He set it on the table beside her hand. She looked at it, then at him. "The chair was empty last year," he said. "And I sat in it because I couldn't not. Because something in me knew before I'd worked it out, before I'd admitted it to myself, before any of the list or the reasons or the figuring out something, just knew that the chair belonged to me. That it had been empty because it was mine." He paused. "And I want to ask you in the most impractical, logistically complicated, genuinely terrifying possible way, if you'd like to do one more supposedly bad idea with me. And come home, Helena. Come home to me and Maisie, and a drawer with a drawing in it and an ugly lamp that apparently travels internationally." He looked at her. "Marry me." Helena Bell, who ran a company with 11 international offices, who had spent 10 years not letting people see her actual face, who had carried a lamp through Tokyo and cried in a hallway over a child's crayon drawing, did not immediately speak. She looked at the ring for a long moment. Then she looked at him. "You said supposedly," she said. "I did. You don't actually think it's a bad idea." "I think it's the best idea I've ever had," he said. "I think it's the idea I've been having since I looked through a window and couldn't walk past." She reached out and touched the ring, not picking it up, just setting her fingertips against it, like confirming it was real. "The lamp is in my bedroom closet," she said. "I know. It needs to come out again. It does. And Maisie wants you to say yes," he said. "She also has opinions about the venue for any future celebration, but I told her that was getting ahead of things." Helena laughed, the real one, all the way real. The one from before she decided laughing too much looked undisciplined. The one Cameron had described from when they were 14, the one Weston had first heard across a dinner table when he'd said something about inflation. It broke across the quiet of Meridian, like something that had been held back for a long time, and had finally been given the room it needed. "Yes," she said. Not performing it, not strategically. Just yes, the way some things are true simply and without requiring further evidence. He picked up the ring and put it on her finger, and it fit the way things fit, when they were chosen carefully. And she looked at it on her hand for a moment, with an expression he didn't try to read because it was hers, private and enormous and fully warranted. 1 year ago, she said quietly. 1 year ago, he said. I was alone. You're not anymore. She looked up at him. Her eyes were wet and she was not managing it. Not this time. Just letting it be what it was, which was perhaps the most significant thing she'd given him in a year of significant things. No, she said, I'm really not. They told Maisie that night when they came home. She was awake. Renata confirmed she had not technically been asleep despite being in bed, because Maisie had spent the evening in a state of strategic anticipation that precluded actual rest. She came downstairs when she heard them come in, appeared at the top of the stairs in her pajamas, with the stuffed rabbit under one arm, and looked down at them with the directness of someone who wants information and is prepared to retrieve it. Well, she said. Helena held up her hand. Maisie looked at the ring, then at Helena, then at her father. I told you to pick somewhere nice, she said to Weston. Meridian's nice, he said. Okay, Maisie said, and came down the stairs with the unhurried authority of someone whose conclusions have been confirmed. She walked up to Helena and hugged her around the middle with the completeness of a child who has decided a thing and is now enacting the decision. And Helena put her arms around her and held on, and Weston stood in the entryway of his house and looked at the two of them and felt something so full he could not have named it if he'd tried. He didn't try. Some things don't need to be named. They just need to be stood inside of. They married the following spring, in a ceremony that was small by Helena's public standards and enormous by everything that actually mattered. The guest list was 30 people, family, genuine friends, the handful of colleagues who had become something more than professional over years of accumulated trust. Harlow's on Clement Street, the bistro where they'd had their first real dinner, closed for the evening at their request and opened its narrow, warm, mismatched room to 30 people who understood what they were celebrating. Cameron stood beside her sister, which had not been a given 6 months ago, and was now simply a fact, the way things become facts when people do the slow, unglamorous work of getting there. She gave a toast that was funny and honest and had one sentence in it that made Helena cry, and Weston's throat tight, and everyone else laugh, which is the only standard for a wedding toast that actually matters. Marcus flew in from Memphis and spent the whole evening talking to Helena about things. Weston could not entirely track from across the room, laughing at intervals with the easy laugh he shared with his brother, gesturing at Weston, occasionally in the way of someone who is telling stories he's the subject of. Weston watched this with the particular feeling of two important things touching each other, and neither of them, not catching fire. Maisie carried the rings. She had opinions about this role, which she had communicated across several conversations in the weeks preceding opinions about the pillow, the timing, the appropriate walking pace. She executed it with the focused professionalism of someone who understood she had been given a responsibility and was not going to be the reason it went sideways. She was 7 now, and had recently informed Weston that she intended to be an architect or possibly a judge, depending, because both jobs were about deciding what things should be. He'd told her she had time to figure it out. She'd told him she was already figuring it out. He believed her. At some point in the evening, after the ceremony and before the dinner became the dancing, Weston stood with Helena in the small courtyard behind Harlow's that they'd strung with lights for the occasion. The April night was cool, that particular spring in Tennessee cool that can't decide between winter and warmth and has chosen to be both, and Helena had her shoes off, which she'd done within an hour of the ceremony's end because Helena Bell wore heels because they were appropriate and took them off because she was human. How do you feel? She asked him. He thought about the question. 1 year ago, he would have given a considered answer, something precise, something that acknowledged the complexity. He still did that. But he'd learned from her that there was another kind of answer possible, the one that said the simple true thing before the qualifying mechanism engaged. Like I sat down in a chair that was waiting for me, he said. She leaned against him, her head against his shoulder. The lights above them were small and warm, and the April dark was full of the sounds of 30 people who loved them eating food and talking too loudly inside. I was so embarrassed, she said, that night, when you walked in and found me there. I know, and then I wasn't. About 3 minutes in, I stopped being embarrassed, and I didn't know why. Because you weren't putting on a show, he said, and I wasn't asking you to. She was quiet for a moment. He could feel her breathing. I've spent a lot of my life being seen without being known, she said. Everyone has an image of Helena Bell. The company, the decisions, the strategy, the success. And I built that. I'm not pretending it wasn't deliberate. But somewhere along the way, I started believing that was what there was. That the Helena underneath the public one wasn't worth the same investment. She is, he said. I know that now. A pause. You taught me that. Not by telling me you didn't do the thing where you say the words. You kept showing up for the underneath version. Every time. She lifted her head and looked at him. Do you know how rare that is? It's what you do, he said. When something matters. She looked at him for a long moment with the expression he'd catalogued over an entire year and had never quite found language for the one with no performance in it. The one that was just her looking at him. The actual her. The underneath version. Fully present and not apologizing for it. It matters, she said. I know, he said. So do you. The door to Harlow's opened, and Maisie appeared in the frame, still in her dress, still with the focus of someone managing an important evening. They're doing the cake, she announced. We're coming, Weston said. You need to hurry up, Maisie said. There are speeches, and then cake. And Helena, Auntie Cameron said she needs you for a photo. Helena straightened, Auntie Cameron. Maisie blinked. She said to call her that. She said it was her own idea. Helena looked at Weston. He looked at her. Okay, Helena said, in a voice that was doing several things at once and managing all of them imperfectly and genuinely. Tell her I'm coming. Maisie disappeared back inside. They followed her in a moment, but not immediately. They stood in the April dark for another few seconds, the two of them, in the particular quiet that belongs to people who have arrived somewhere they weren't certain they'd get to, who have done the difficult and the specific and the unglamorous work of becoming real to each other, and are now standing inside the result. Some things begin at windows. Some begin at tables. Some begin the moment you stop walking past something that is asking you, without words, to stay. Weston Avery had stood on a sidewalk on a Friday night in October and looked through a window and seen a woman holding a menu she wasn't reading, a candle burning beside an empty chair, a gift no one had come for. He had made a choice that was simple and difficult and correct in the way that real choices are not clean, not without cost, not without the long, complicated middle where nothing is certain. And here is what that year had taught him. Quietly and without announcement, the life you want is rarely the one you planned. It's more often the one you walked into because something in you couldn't walk past. It shows up in the wrong restaurant at the wrong time with the wrong everything. It comes with complications and lists and people who are hurt for reasons that are real and valid. It requires you to be patient with other people's grief and honest with your own and willing to sit in the uncertainty of a thing you can't yet name. But the chair that's waiting for you, the one that belongs to you specifically, the one that has the shape of your particular life built into it, that chair doesn't announce itself. You don't receive a notification. You just look through a window one ordinary evening, and something in you knows. Something underneath the list and the reasons and the appropriate response. Something that was always going to stand in the doorway and say, I'm the man who was smart enough to show up. Weston went inside, back to his 30 people and his daughter, and the woman with his ring on her finger, and the sister-in-law who had decided on her own to be called Auntie. He went back to the noise and the warmth and the imperfect, specific, irreplaceable texture of the life he had built and been given and walked into. The empty chair was full. It would stay that way.